Hello, everyone. My name is Kanushri. I'm going to be your co host. Before we dive into our Macroeconomics Masterclass, I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to the organization making this session possible. Let's Unbound. Let's Unbound is dedicated to empowering students across more than 25 countries by fostering STEM skills, life skills, and college readiness. Our mission is to help students achieve their life skills by 18 and life goals by 35 through personalized learning and mentorship. With programs ranging from skill development, gifted test, college prep to Ivy League readiness, Let's Unbound has taught over 4,000 students, conducted more than 125 hours of teaching, earned a global 4.9 out of 5 rating. By combining innovative teaching methods with strong mentorship, Let's Unbound helps students realize their potential and make a positive impact on the world. So, as we begin today's masterclass, remember you're building skills that will help you excel far beyond the test in college, career, and in life. Over to you, Harsh.
Thank you, Kanushi. Okay, so good evening and welcome all the participants here for this session. Today, we will be talking about the AP Macroeconomics course and we'll also discuss strategies to prepare for this test. We'll just take a look at all the aspects of this particular test today. Okay, let's get started then. Okay, so AP Macroeconomics is a college level course that introduces students to the principles that apply to an economic system as a whole. Okay, you would be aware that there are two different AP courses which are offered in the domain of economics. One is the AP Microeconomics course, and the other one is the Macroeconomics course that we're talking about today. As is mentioned here, applies to an economic system as a whole. So we are talking about larger systems in action, like the governments, unemployment, GDP, growth in the GDP, interest rates, all the macroeconomic factors that are usually talked about, that are usually considered whenever we are discussing the economies of nation and also international economics. So the course places particular emphasis on the study of national income and price level determination. And it also develops students' familiarity with the economic performance measures of the financial sector, like the stabilization policies which are deployed by the governments across the globe, the concept of economic growth and international economics, including trade, exports, and the money market or the foreign exchange markets as well. Students learn to use graphs, charts, and data to analyze, describe, and explain these economic concepts. So there is a lot of thrust as far as the graphical representation of the concepts is concerned. Okay, lot of emphasis on charts and data so that a student can analyze those charts and is able to describe and explain the economic concepts with the help of those charts. Okay. College course equivalence. So AP Macroeconomics is equivalent to a single semester introductory college course in economics. So you get a 5-pointer on this particular AP. It would be considered as maybe a 4 credits for 1 semester course as far as the college education is concerned. What are the prerequisites for this course? So there are no particular prerequisites for the AP Macro and the microeconomics courses both. Students should be able to read a college level textbook and they should possess basic mathematical skills and graphing skills. So concepts like calculating the slope of a graph, concepts like calculating the area under a graph, concepts such as reading the equilibrium points on a graph. So basic math skills would be tested on this particular examination. Okay, you must be good at understanding of graphs. You must be good at interpreting the graphs which are given to you. Students interested in the big picture economy like the GDP, inflation, government policy should opt for the AP Macroeconomics course. It is also a strong choice for people who are planning to major in the fields like economics, finance, public policy, business, or international relations, international economics as well. Okay, this course is very well suited for students who prefer understanding concepts and policy impacts over intensive mathematical and graphing analysis, which is your AP Microeconomics part. Okay, but as I have already mentioned, basic exposure to graphing and some algebra would really be required in this course as well. Okay, maybe not as much as in the AP Microeconomics course, but at least to a basic extent, it would be required for the macroeconomics course as well. Okay, ideal candidates for the AP Macroeconomics course as far as the majors are concerned. So students who are considering taking economics, finance, public policy, business administration, political science, or international relations as their majors, this is this is a very good course that you can opt for. It would be highly relevant to your particular field of study. So you might want to consider AP Macroeconomics as one of the better options in terms of which AP you want to go for. Interest, so those fascinated by how governments take their decisions and how national economic factors like unemployment and inflation affect an entire country. Okay, if you're actually interested in those macro concepts, unemployment, GDP, real GDP, growth in GDP, etc., this is a very good course once again from a knowledge point of view that you want to acquire. Okay. Then if I talk about the strengths, so this course is ideal for students who excel in conceptual understanding and policy analysis rather than those who prefer heavy graphing and calculations, which are very much a part of the AP Microeconomics syllabus. So here the mathematics portion is not as heavy as the AP Microeconomics part, but then a basic conceptual understanding, as I have mentioned previously as well, regarding the different graphs and interpreting the graphs, policy analysis, okay, all of that would be very helpful when you pursue this particular course. Now, coming to the course contents, you can see the entire syllabus of this AP has been divided into 6 units. Okay? Unit 1 talks about the basic economic concepts. Okay, Unit 2 talks about the economic indicators and the business cycle. Unit 3 is about the core concepts of national income and price determination. So GDP, GNP, real GDP, all of that would be covered in unit number 3. Okay, you can see this particular unit has the maximum weightage as far as the exams are concerned. Almost 1/4 of your examination is based on this particular unit. Then unit number 4 focuses on the financial sector. Okay, in particular, the money markets, interest rates, etc. All of that would be a part of this unit number 4. Unit 5 is about long-run consequences of stabilization policies, which are typically deployed by governments around the world when they want to control concepts, like inflation. Okay, when they want to stimulate growth in their respective economies. So what are the long run consequences of these stabilization policies? Okay, that would be covered in unit number 5. And then finally, unit 6 is about the concept of international trade and open economy. Okay, so uh, concepts such as international economics, concepts such as free trade policies or trade barriers, all of that would be discussed in unit number 6. Okay, so if you look at the exam weighting, you can see that unit number 3, unit number 4, and unit number 5 combined together have the maximum weightage. They will almost cover something like 60% of your test. The other units would contribute to the remaining 35% approximately. So 60 to 65% is from units 3, 4, and 5. The remaining 35% is unit 1, 2, and 6. So overall, it's not a very large syllabus, so as to say, but then it is still focusing a little bit on the mathematical aspects of it. As I have mentioned previously, the graphing and the calculation of slope, area, equilibriums, etc. from those graphs, that would be That would be an ability you need to develop. Talking about the examination structure, you have two sections on this test. First is the MCQ, or the multiple choice type questions. So that is 60 questions, and for attempting those 60 questions, you get 70 minutes. Now, the general level of difficulty for these questions is, I would say, easy to moderate. So it is not very difficult to attempt all the 60 questions within that given time frame of 70 minutes. Okay. The examination weightage for the MCQ type questions is 66.66%, which is 2/3 of your test. The remaining 1/3 is for the free response questions, the FRQs. So you have 3 free response questions in total. And for attempting those 3 free response questions, you get a maximum time of 60 minutes. Now, this includes a 10 minutes reading period as well. And this is 1/3 of your test. So overall, if you need a good score on this particular test, the MCQs would play a major role for you to succeed in getting that score that you are aiming for. Okay, if I talk approximately what is the raw score that I need to score a perfect 5 on this test, so I would say I would need in excess of 70%. Okay, so assuming that the total score is 100, I would need a score of 70 and above if I want to score a 5 on this test. So this is a high scoring AP, and compared to other APs from different subject areas, this one, the scores are really on the higher side. Calculator policy, a 4-function scientific or graphing calculator is allowed on all the sections of the exam. So throughout your exam, you can use the calculator. As I said, little bit of mathematics is involved in solving problems, and for that, they have allowed the usage of calculator. Now, a brief discussion as far as which particular graphs and visuals the examination focuses on. Now, if you consider different concepts from those 6 units that we have already discussed, your syllabus, so students are expected to model economic situations using graphs or visuals throughout this syllabus. Okay, as the AP economic skills outline, student must be able to demonstrate their understanding of economic situations, which is accurately labeled on the graphs, and different points on those graphs or those curves which are plotted. You should be, as I said, you should be able to interpret those particular points on the graph. Okay. You must also be able to manipulate these graphs, and you should be able to provide visuals in the free response questions. That means in the free response question, you should be able to draw these graphs as well. Mostly on the multiple choice questions, they will only ask you about the interpretation. But on the free response, there would be questions where you are supposed to draw graphs from scratch. Okay, so graphing is one aspect of economics you must be really good at. These are the different graphs that you are likely to see on the test. Okay, the ones that you see here, for example, the production possibility curve, a very common graph. You must be able to interpret this graph, points inside, points outside, points on the graph. What is the different meaning? Okay, this is the basic demand and supply curve. So the point of equilibrium where the demand and supply intersect each other. Okay, then the aggregate demand model, or the aggregate demand and the aggregate supply model, ADAS. Okay, so points where the short range aggregate supply meets the aggregate demand, or the long range aggregate supply meets the aggregate demand. Okay, so you should be in a position to interpret these graphs. Okay, the money market graph, the reserves or the quantity of reserves graph. Okay, the loanable funds market graph, which shows you the real interest rate versus the quantity of available loanable funds. Okay, the Phillips curve, which gives you a relationship between the rate of inflation and the unemployment rate. Okay, so this one in particular is always there on the examination. The foreign exchange market. Okay, so for example, graphs between dollars and euros. Okay, how the two are moving against each other in the international market. Then there are Then there are certain models also which you must be able to explain, like the business cycle or the circular flow model or the aggregate production function. All of this, the interpretation part of this is really important. Okay, so there would definitely be questions as far as interpretation of the graphs are concerned. Now, let's take a look at few of the questions which have previously appeared on these tests. Okay, it should give you a fair idea as to what questions you are looking at in this particular test. Okay, so we'll start with the sample questions as far as the MCQs or the multiple choice type questions are concerned. Okay, so this is a sample question. You can see it says that the graph shows the production possibility curve for a small township that is deciding to build parks and gymnasiums. So which of the following combinations of parks and gymnasiums is unattainable given the township's available resources? Okay, so those of you who are aware about the production possibility curve, okay, any point which lies on the exterior of the curve, outside this curve with reference to the x and y axis, is an unattainable point with reference to the available resources. So here we can clearly see that the parks are plotted on the x-axis, the gymnasiums on the y-axis. So the point 20 parks and 4 gymnasiums, you can see, lies outside the region which is trapped between the axis and the curve. So option E is the correct option, which says that it would be unattainable to have 20 parks and 4 gymnasiums. Which of the following changes would result in an indeterminate change in the equilibrium price in a perfectly competitive market? Okay, so when we say an indeterminate change, that means we are not in a position to definitely comment as far as the equilibrium price is concerned, because it can either increase or decrease. Both the possibilities are open. So if we consider all the choices which are given here, so an increase in demand and an increase in supply, an increase type of relationship would actually not enable us, okay, to determine what would be the change in the equilibrium. If one of them is increasing, the other is decreasing, we can definitely comment on the movement of the equilibrium price. But here we won't be in a position to comment on the equilibrium price. So this would definitely result in an indeterminate change in the equilibrium price. The correct answer is option B. Moving on, question 3, it says which of the following is accounted for in the calculation of a country's gross domestic product? Okay, so this is from that third unit. As you can see, okay, calculation of GDP, if we are talking about what would be included and what would not be included. So which of the following is accounted for? So out of the given options here, if we consider sales of stocks and bonds, changes in inventories, changes in product quality, underground economy, non-market activities. So there is only one thing here. The changes in the inventory levels would definitely be accounted for when we are calculating the gross domestic product, because changes in inventory would tell us whether the production has increased or it has decreased, or it would give us a definite idea related to an important component of your GDP. So correct answer there is B, changes in inventories. The population of country X is 250,000. The labor force out of that 250,000 is just 200,000. So if 175,000 people are employed, what is the unemployment rate? Remember, when we are calculating the unemployment rate, we are only concerned about the labor force or the working population, not the entire population. So out of 200,000, 175,000 are employed, which means 25,000 are unemployed. If I calculate that as a percentage out of 200,000, it would work out to be 1/8, which is 12.5%. So correct answer here is option B once again. Which of the following will happen if the government raises both taxes and spending by $100 million and the marginal propensity to consume is 0.8? Okay, so if once again we consider these options, that the government raises the taxes and it also raises the spending by 100 million. Okay, so what will happen as far as the real GDP is concerned? It will definitely increase, okay, because of the increase in spending. So the real GDP will definitely increase, but obviously by a maximum of $100 billion. Okay, that is the maximum that can happen in this particular case. So option C is the correct option. Which of the following would lead to an increase in nominal interest rates? So if we are talking about the money market, demand for money is obviously a criteria which will decide what happens with the nominal interest rates. So if we go through all the options here, so a contractionary monetary policy accompanied by an increase in demand for money would definitely lead to an increase in nominal interest rate. Okay, that the government is also trying to contract the monetary policy, and it is also trying to, and it is also, basically restricting the supply of money. And on the other hand, there is an increase in demand simultaneously. So overall, this would lead to an increase in the interest rates, okay, because there would be a greater demand and a lesser supply, which would definitely result in an increased interest rate. This question, it says a country's economy is in equilibrium at point H. Okay, so we see that the aggregate demand is equal to the short range aggregate supply at point H. So there is an equilibrium right now. So it says which of the following policies would be most effective to reduce the price levels in the short run. So if we have to reduce the price level in the short run, okay, we must make people save more, or increasing the interest on the reserves would obviously lead to a reduction in price levels, because if people are spending more, then obviously it would lead to an inflation, would lead to price rise as well. Okay, so increasing the interest on the reserves would be a good measure here to reduce the price levels in the short run. Country H's current domestic output is lower than its potential domestic output. So right now they are underperforming economy. Assume that the central bank now decreases its administered interest rates. What will be the short-run effects of the central bank's action on the cyclical unemployment and real income? Okay, so the central bank decreases the administered interest rates, which means availability of funds becomes easier. So cyclical unemployment, therefore, would most certainly decrease because industries would get easy loans. So that would result in a greater employment, and cyclical unemployment would surely decrease. And the real income would most likely increase. So option E is the correct option in this case. Okay. An increase in the demand for loanable funds could be best explained by which of the following? Okay, that what would result in an increase in demand for loanable funds? So if we look at all the options, so an increase in firms' optimism about the future performance of the country's economy would actually result in an increase in demand for loanable funds, because if the firms believe that the future of a country's economy is bright, then they see a lot of scope, or they are very optimistic about their own growth. And therefore, there will be an increase in demand for loanable funds, because some of them would try to expand, or some of them would try to come up with newer ventures. So therefore, we can say that option C here is the best possible option. If both contractionary monetary policy and contractionary fiscal policy are carried out, what will most likely happen to interest rates and the real GDP in the short run? Okay, so in the short run, if both the policies, the monetary as well as the fiscal policy, is contractionary in nature, then the real GDP would most certainly decrease because of less spending in the market. Okay, and the change in interest rates would be indeterminate, because we will not be in a position to comment with certainty about the interest rates, because both the policies are being contractionary. Okay, so ideally a contractionary policy should reduce the rates, because the demand should go down. But Here, the fiscal policy is also contractionary along with monetary. So again, we are not in a position to comment what would happen to the real interest rates. Okay. If an economy is currently in a recessionary gap, okay, if an economy is currently in a recessionary gap, which of the following changes would result in an increase in real GDP in the short run and a decrease in the price level in the long run? Okay, so they are mentioning a hypothetical situation where a country is currently going through recession. Okay, so obviously government interventions would obviously be targeted at increasing the pace of growth, okay, increasing the real GDP. So what can the government do here, or what policies would result? Okay, so there is an increase in the productivity of the economy's resources. Okay, so which of the following changes would result in an increase in real GDP? There is an increase in the productivity of the resources, means you produce more output with the same amount of resources. That would definitely help in a growth as far as the real GDP is concerned in short run. And obviously then in the long run, it would also mean that there would be a decrease in price levels because of the increased efficiency. Okay. If the government offers a tax credit to businesses, what will be the most likely effects of this action? Okay, so whenever a government extends tax credits, so an increase in investment spending is something that the government expects and something that usually happens. Okay, so there would be an increase in investment spending and there would be correspondingly an increase in the capital stock and the real output. Okay, so if the government is offering the benefit of tax credit to the businesses, there would definitely be an increase in the investment spending. Okay, so option C is the correct option here. If an economy experiences an improvement in technology, what will happen to its production possibility curve, the PPC, and the long run aggregate supply, or the LRAS curve? Okay. So if the economy is experiencing an improvement in technology, it would obviously mean that the economy as a whole will grow and these curves will grow outwards, or they will shift outwards. So the correct answer here is both the curves will be shifting in an outward direction. Okay. The diagram shows the short run Phillips curve and the long run Phillips curve. For an economy, if the rate of inflation is currently 6%, what is the current unemployment rate? Okay, so at 6%, the point on the graph that we are looking at is the point of intersection of the SRPC and the LRPC. So there we can see that the unemployment rate, okay, corresponding to that would be, if we look at the graph here, so at 6%, sorry, on the SRPC, we can correspondingly see that the unemployment rate is just 2%. Okay, so the correct answer to question number 14 here is the current unemployment rate is 2%, corresponding to an inflation rate of 6%, which we can read from the SRPC diagram. If the United States budget deficit increases, what will most likely happen to the United States dollar in the foreign exchange market? Okay, so if the United States budget deficit increases, which means that the United States government wants more money to fill that gap because there is a lot of deficit, so they will borrow a lot of money, which would obviously result in an increase in the interest rates. So the interest rates will definitely increase, and obviously, as a result of an increased interest rates, the dollars will appreciate in the international currency market. Okay, so in the foreign exchange market, the dollar will appreciate because of an increase in the interest rate. So those are the type of multiple choice questions that you will see on this test. Okay, let's take a quick look at a free response question as well. Okay, so a free response question looks something like this. Assume that the country of Zetoland is in short-run equilibrium. So the expected inflation rate is 4%. The actual rate of unemployment is 5%. So the natural rate of unemployment is 6% and the equilibrium real interest rate is 3%. So they have given us a lot of data to start with. Okay, expected inflation 4%, actual unemployment is 5%, natural rate of unemployment is 6%, and the equilibrium interest rate is 3%. So part A of this question, they say draw a correctly labeled graph of the aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply, long run aggregate supply curves for Zetoland. Show each of the following quantities on the graph. Okay, so obviously, as we had discussed earlier as well, that you would have to draw graphs as far as the FRQs are concerned. So for example, if you draw here a graph, uh, okay, which asks you about the aggregate demand and the aggregate supply. So we know the aggregate demand would be a sloping downward curve. Okay, the SRAS would be a upward sloping curve, and this would be the point of equilibrium that you would be drawing. So corresponding to that, on the y-axis you have the real GDP, and on the x-axis you have the price levels. So you can directly read the price level and the real GDP corresponding to that point of equilibrium. So that was part A of your question. Similarly, part B, they say assume no policy action is taken to address the output gap in Zetoland. Explain how the economy would adjust to full employment in the long run. Okay, so when we talk about the adjustment, okay, so obviously the short run aggregate supply will decrease in the long run as a result of an increase in nominal wages, input prices, or you can say inflationary expectations. Okay. Then part C, it says assume instead that the central bank is concerned about the buildup of inflationary pressures in Zetoland and is considering taking action to fight inflation. Assuming the banking system in Zetoland has ample reserves, identify one monetary policy action the central bank would likely take. Okay, so if there is an inflationary pressure and we need to decide on a monetary policy, okay, and it is a given here that the banking system has ample reserves, so we can say that the central bank would most certainly increase its administered interest rates. Okay, it would increase the interest rate so that it can control the supply of money in the market and therefore reduce the inflationary pressure. So the answer to part C is a decrease in the supply, which would be attained by increasing the interest rates. Okay. Then how would the monetary policy action identified in part C would affect each of the following in the short run? The price of the previously issued bonds in Zetoland, the real output, the net financial capital flows to Zetoland. Okay, so if the interest rates are going to increase, then obviously the price of the previously issued bonds in Zetoland would decrease. Okay, the real output in Zetoland would decrease as well, and the increase in nominal interest rate would decrease the interest sensitive consumption and investment spending, and it will decrease the aggregate demand. Okay. Then it says based on the change in the value of the ZEET shown in party, what will happen to the exports, and we can explain that part as well, similar to what we have done in the above parts there. Okay, so basically all these questions, the free response questions, they are broken down into at least 5 to 6 parts, and each part usually would get you like 1 point, 2 point. So overall the entire scoring would depend on how well you do in terms of answering all the parts independently. Now you don't have to write like a lot of explanation for these parts. Just 1 to 2 lines of explanation for each part and subpart should be good enough to get you that 1 mark. Okay, so those are the type of questions that you are likely to see on the test. Now, in terms of preparation, I can say one thing, both the multiple choice and the free response questions, they are more of conceptual questions. So you need a lot of conceptual clarity as far as this particular AP is concerned. Okay, they are mostly checking out on your fundamentals, not too much of mathematical working through the problems. Okay, so the best possible preparation would include that you have 100% clarity in terms of the concepts. Okay, understanding of the graphs, understanding of the equilibrium points, shift in the equilibrium, the slope of the curve, all of those concepts are really, really important from this particular examination point of view. You need to practice extensively for the MCQs as well as the FRQs. And more importantly, you need to familiarize yourself with the pattern of the test, like 3 FRQs or the number of MCQs that you have to attempt in the restricted amount of time that you have. So it's more about getting used to the examination structure that should help you to score better on this test. Utilize resources. So calculator usage is very important. You must be very comfortable with the device that you are using. Online practice, books, etc. Okay, there are plenty of online resources available as far as doing practice for this test is concerned. So you should actually practice a lot for this test, because it's more of theoretical or conceptual clarity which is required for this test. Okay. So I'm open to take any questions that you have as far as the AP Macroeconomics examination, the examination structure, question types, etc. is concerned. I'll be more than happy to answer your queries. Okay. So the forum is now open for any questions that you have as far as the exam is concerned. If we do not have questions, I'd like to pass it on to Kanushri. She can take it over from here.
Thank you so much for a wonderful session, Harsh. Well, we host unique AP, SAT, and IBDB masterclasses every weekend, and we'll be sending out email updates to keep you informed. Before we wrap up, I'd also like to take a moment to display our students' AP results. It's truly inspiring to see their hard work and commitment reflected in these scores. That brings us to the close of today's session. I am sharing some important links in the chat box. Please feel free to save them for your reference. We look forward to welcoming all of you to our upcoming events and masterclasses. Thank you once again for joining us today. Until next time, take care and keep learning.